Well, welcome everybody to Leeds Theosophical Society for our latest online event. We've been doing these now for about 4.5 years. I've lost track actually of how many we've done, but we've had some fascinating guests on during that time, and we have a particularly fascinating guest this afternoon. We're very proud and honoured to welcome Gillian Monks, who is an esotericist, a writer, and has many, many other interests as well. So welcome, Gillian, and thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us this afternoon and talk about your life and your work. Can I just ask a basic question, which I often ask people at the start of these conversations, and that is, how did you first get into spiritual and or esoteric and unusual things? Did that go back a long way in your life, or is it something more recent?
Uh, Thank you for asking me here this afternoon, Tim, and hello, everybody. To answer that question, it goes back to my young childhood, really. My mother was fascinated by reincarnation, rebirth. She took me to Sri Lanka when I was 10 years old. We visited lots of very um, highly progressed Buddhist priests who had written books and things about reincarnation. Um, I listened to them talking. So right back to my childhood, I've had my feet firmly planted in the spiritual, but also the spiritual aspect of the natural world. That has always walked with me as well through my whole life.
And how did that progress then from your childhood? When did you start to read and study these things? When did you start to associate with other people with similar interests?
Um, that's difficult to answer in one sense. I've always related to other people. I'm a Quaker, first and foremost. So knowing other Quakers, knowing their beliefs, as sharing certain practices was helpful. But as far as the natural world goes itself, I've always loved the land. I've always gardened. I've always connected to the land. But it was when I actually was suffering from ME, which is about 25 years ago now, that it actually gave me the time and the space to follow, to look into other aspects of belief. And I found my way to Druidry. And that was, I actually really thank my illness then, because it gave me a huge opportunity. And I think illness, especially chronic illness that takes people a long time to recover from, often is a stepping stone to other things, especially in the spiritual world.
Yes, as are problems in general. Often people are driven towards these things because of particular crises in their lives, because of financial problems, health problems, as you say, marital problems, job problems, all kinds of problems. And they start to question a lot of things about their life. Let me take you back to this idea of the natural world, because it seems to me that this is something that is so fundamental, and it's something that many people have lost. But there is an innate tendency for people to want to go to nature. You've only got to look at, many places at the weekends when people go there. People are naturally drawn to nature. Do you think this is because people do find themselves kind of divorced from the natural world? And to some extent, because of that, they are divorced from themselves in many ways.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, a lot of our illness, a lot of our mental challenges and ill health is due to this separation from the natural world. We are we are of this earth, just like all the other animals and plants. And we have built a modern life in the last, certainly in the last 300 years, which has really segregated us from that natural world. And we desperately need to get back that connection. So people being drawn to, yes, activities, leisure activities, going out into the country, being with nature is part of it. But we actually need to do more than that. We need to live more again with awareness of the natural world. And in to integrate and interact with the natural world on a day-to-day basis for our well-being and for the well-being of the world as well, for the earth, because that is what is missing.
It seems to me, Gillian, that over the last few decades, perhaps since the 50s, 60s, 70s, there has been a greater interest in earth-based religions and the idea that there are spirits, and earth religions like Wicca, paganism, Druidry, as you were talking about. Can you tell us a little bit how you were drawn into that particular strand and what it actually involves? Because obviously the Druids were the priest class of the Celts, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And they did, historically, they were the historians, the teachers, the people who really guided the kings or the heads of clans or whatever. They were the scientists. They were the wise keepers of knowledge. Today, it's somewhat different, and modern Druidry has, as it should, as everything should, has evolved into the 21st century. So it's not quite the same, but we have basic beliefs that the main one being there are about 8 basic main beliefs in Druidry. One is animism, which is a belief in sacred life in everything, whatever you care to call that. Another is polytheism, which I don't particularly subscribe to, but belief in more than one god or goddess, whatever. A belief in various deities, especially local deity to your area. I tend to believe in just that of sacred life in everything, so that doesn't really affect me. The wisdom of trees has always been extremely important to Druidry and to practicing Druids, and still is. The trees hold a great deal of wisdom for the whole of the natural world, and they also interact and have a higher intelligence than until very recently we have given them credit for. There's also the belief in the fairy realms, in other levels of energetic existence, belief in life after death and reincarnation, respect for our ancestors, a belief specifically in Awen, which is a Welsh word, which means, again, that deity, that life in everything, but also inspiration. So it's sort of inspiration through central deity. It's a very difficult word to translate. But also along with that, especially now in modern times, comes ethical behavior and ecological responsibility. And those two things are also extremely important to a lot of modern day pagans in general, but to Druids in particular. And I have to say that Druidry tends to mirror my Quaker practice. People seem to think it should be completely separate and different, but it's actually two sides of the same coin.
I think what we see here, Gillian, is like a commonality amongst different beliefs down the years. You know, there are certain key ideas enshrined in Druidry and in Theosophy and in the ageless wisdom tradition, which don't change. And these are some of the ideas which you've just elaborated, the fact that everything is interconnected, everything is conscious, everything is evolving, everything is trying to reach a higher state. We go through these long evolutionary cycles of birth, death, rebirth, etc., etc. So you can see why a lot of people are becoming increasingly attracted to these things, because certainly the traditional religion of the West, Christianity as was, doesn't believe in reincarnation and hasn't since the 6th century. So do you think that these emerging nature religions, pagan religions, and your own strand, do you think these are actually fulfilling a gap, a kind of spiritual hunger that people have?
I'm sure that they are. It goes hand in hand with the disconnection from the natural world anyway, at a physical level. And this is fulfilling or helping to begin to fulfill the disconnection that's occurred at a spiritual level. So I do think that we do all need this connection at a higher level. We need these beliefs. We need this interaction. It's really important. And again, I think a lot of people are perhaps if the main religions had actually kept to their original ethos and teachings, they wouldn't have, certainly as far as Christianity is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, Christianity has let itself down. It's let the people down because it has gone to just major crowd control and authority at a human level, and has actually lost all that made it special and important to the general populace, especially the accent on unconditional love, which is what Christ came to teach us all. So yes, I do think that the religion has been its own downfall in general, not just Christianity. The other will come. The other religions, people will become disenchanted, just the same as a lot of Christians have. And I think that this is very important that they're given an alternative that they can follow. But the main thing with, I think, things like paganism in general, and certainly Druidry, is that you can follow these practices and beliefs and still retain whatever other religion you want to believe in, because it goes seamlessly hand in hand. It's just a way of life. Whatever your beliefs, it's a way of life.
And very interestingly, I did some research recently about changing attitudes to reincarnation. And I looked at the work of a company called the Pew Research Company in America, highly respected attitude survey company who seemed to be very accurate about talking about general issues. And they asked people from all sorts of backgrounds and ages and religions what they felt about reincarnation and did they believe in rebirth of some kind. And round about a third of Christians, and obviously America is still much more of a Christian country, I would suggest, than perhaps the UK is these days. Round about a third of all Christians said they believed in reincarnation and rebirth in some form. With Hispanic Catholics, it went up to more than 40%. With some of the evangelicals, it went down to as low as around 10 or 11%. But overall, it showed that around about a third of all Christians go against the main tenet of their religion and believe in rebirth. Interestingly enough, when they polled agnostics and atheists, they found significant numbers of them actually believing in rebirth. More people believing in rebirth in some sectors than actually believing in God, which is a strange thing. So these new emergent religions, do you think they will actually impact on things like Christianity? Do you think Christianity is so crystallized and fossilized in its ways that it's impervious to any kind of reform?
I don't know whether there is a future for Christianity, but I do really deeply feel that people need to turn to something else. And it doesn't surprise me that so many people, even if they don't believe in a God, do believe in reincarnation, because it's certain things for intelligent people make sense. And I think when you come up against certain ideas, basic truths which resonate deep within you, you cannot do anything but believe in them, because they make sense. And a lot of the mainstream religions at present no longer make sense because they have been so interfered with and distorted that we need to go back to something simpler, which answers people's questions. So many people say, why does people, say Christians who believe in God, why does God allow all these dreadful things to happen? Well, the answer is he doesn't. It's nothing to do with him. It's our responsibility. We've created it. We're suffering for it, and we have to put it right. That makes sense. And intelligent people need to understand these things. so that it actually begins to make sense, because what religion is espousing at present does not make sense.
Yeah, this idea of saying, oh, it's God's will, there's nothing we can do about it, is so deeply ingrained in a kind of folk memory within us that it's difficult to get rid of it, isn't it?
Yes, it is, rather, unfortunately. But I
Yeah.
think the more people experience, the more people begin to question and talk to each other and learn and do things like come to theosophy, find answers in places like theosophy. The more sense it will begin to make, and they will be able to perhaps put their own beliefs together. I think that we all need to find our individual path, and that might not be the same for everyone, but it's similar routes, just by different way places. But we'll all get to the right place in the end. But it's for everybody to to meet and to rise and meet their challenges, and to explore the possibilities, and to make their own decisions, not be told by somebody else. And so what they believe and the way they practice what they believe becomes authentic to them. And that's really important.
Yeah, this idea of taking responsibility is at the heart of theosophy and similar traditions. We rise and fall. Our destinies are governed by our own actions. But I'd like to just take you back to something you said a little while back, which I found fascinating and ties in very much with some research I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, which is into the world of nature spirits or elementals and the other world of angels or devas, shining ones. Um, Now, obviously, this is something that our ancestors were intimately aware of. They knew there were spirits of the land and the air and all the rest of it. And these spirits were important because they helped the health of their children, animals, the survival of their crops, the weather, and all sorts of other things. So there was an intimate relationship. As you said, since industrialization began 250, 300 years ago, and more people have emigrated from the countryside to the towns, and we've become progressively divorced from nature, people don't believe these things anymore. And if you say, look, there really are fairies at the bottom of your garden, then people will think that you're crazy. How do you actually convince people of this? Because I do all sorts of talks, and I'm actually trying to make a film about this at the moment. But how do you get people to reconnect with these invisible presences? Because they're not physical. They operate on the etheric and astral, and in the case of the angels, more on the mental realms. How do you persuade people that these things actually exist?
That's a very good question, and it's one that I have been asking myself for several decades now. How do you explain to so many people, not just explain, but how do you get them to experience? And I think, to begin with, the first thing to do is to just simply take them out into nature, encourage them to engage with growing something, because this is taking a small seed and planting it, and actually watching from that tiny seed a whole large plant. It's like a whole oak tree will come from an acorn, is magical in itself. And I think that starts to open the gateway when people actually become involved with working with the earth and with growing plants, not animals too, but plants particularly, that this actually begins to open a door for them, but also to look inside themselves. Um, it is a case of connecting deeply with their inner selves, as well as what is outside around them and what comes from that. And it's those two facets which help to bring in, allow this to open the door, to allow these other energies in.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point there. And one of the things that I often say to people is that, you know, in the modern world, our consciousness dictates that we look outside for information because we can now see into the furthest depths of the universe and the tiniest fragments of matter. But, you know, the sages and the initiates and the wise people throughout the epochs have all said the same thing, that it all lies within ourselves, that we have that seed that you mentioned, you know, the oak
Yes.
tree, all actually there in conception within ourselves, and it's a question of releasing that and finding that inner self. And this is what's so difficult in the modern world, because there are so many distractions and people are just diverted by technology and leisure and earning a living and all the other things that we have to do. So it's very difficult for people to do that. I mean, I know more people meditate these days, and I guess that's a pretty good starting point to do this, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we have a group locally who meet every new moon and full moon and meditate for half an hour, and simply work upon the important energies to us. And really, I think to fully answer your question, Tim, is that if you say to anybody, if you just surround yourself with the feeling of unconditional love, that then raises your energies, your personal energy, like nothing else does. And if people can't work out what unconditional love is, we'll start with conditional love, but that's really very flawed. But things like um, the pure love that you feel when you see a newborn baby, or to see a little kitten or a puppy, and that absolute opening up of, isn't that, that's just amazing, that's so sweet. That is a key to unconditional love. If people work on that and basically bathe themselves in the energies of unconditional love, just surround themselves with it, send it out, forget yourself, surrender to that love, send it out to others. That then will open all sorts of doorways. They will then begin to see other things. They'll begin to pick up, sense other life forms, other things going on around them. And that is really the key, is love.
Well, that's a very interesting point at which to slightly change the direction of the interview, but thank you for that. Now, one of your main activities is as a writer, and you're the author of a number of books. Could you tell us briefly about those, and more importantly, how you got into writing? Because as a writer myself, I'm always interested to hear how other people are sucked into this difficult profession.
Okay, I always wanted to be a writer. Right from being a small child, I actually used to take little spiral back notebooks and fill them with pencil scribble at about the age of 4 or 5, before I could even write. And I used to say, I'm writing my books. So there we are. I've still got one or two of them. I used to write books before I could read and write. Um, I actually started my career as a writer the year I turned 60. And this was because it was in answer specifically to questions from younger people. I used to facilitate lots of workshops, and one of them was how to celebrate Christmas authentically. And it was making evergreen decorations and the origins to those, the pagan origins to those decorations, and what was behind the whole mystique of Christmas and the whole ethos of it. And I was running these workshops, and I had about 3 of these workshops before Christmas in 2015, and they were fully subscribed. And people were coming along to me saying, "Oh yes, and I have a young child. How do I sort of celebrate Christmas with a young child authentically, and all this sort of thing?" And I sat down and I thought, I should have written some notes for this, because they've gone away with lots of ideas and they've gone away with wreaths for their doors and the whatever. But I should have written some notes. I'll write some notes and I'll email everybody who came on the workshop my notes. Well, my notes actually were my first book. I sat down and I suddenly thought, there's no way that I can condense these into just a few pages or even a couple of chapters. I thought, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write what I need to write, and it's as long as it's long. Well, it was a 360-page book, and that was my first book, Merry Midwinter. And I was very, very lucky because I was snapped up by a publisher who was really keen to publish it. And that was like a fairy tale.
Well, that's something that's always proved rather enigmatic for me, having been writing for so many years. So that's good. And I think it probably shows the inevitable quality of that. And the fact that you also, you reached a particular niche with people there. And that's what writing's all about these days, isn't it? It's all about trying to find particular things which connect with particular people. What did you do after that? How did your writing career progress after the first book?
Well, I didn't go back to the same publisher because the complication there was that they worked via crowdfunding, which is a complex thing in itself, and it can take several years to get anything into print because you have to wait for everybody to pledge enough money to actually publish it. So I couldn't wait. I had lots of things I wanted to write, so I couldn't wait. So I got another small publisher, and I've brought out 6 books now. 2 are very short booklets. But again, following along the same lines as Merry Midwinter, as to how to look at our ordinary life and celebrate it, live it, enjoy it authentically. So I wrote, after Merry Midwinter, I wrote the alternative advent calendar, and then Spring in Your Step, which was all about springtime, just like I'd done with through the winter season. This was how to celebrate and enjoy living through spring, and all the little celebrations and what the natural world, what it all means to us, and how important it is, and how we can bring that into our life. And that's at the back of all my books. It's how can we make the most of our ordinary days, our ordinary life, and actually turn them into extraordinary days and extraordinary life, and live a really amazing existence.
Now, what are you working on at the moment in terms of your writing?
Something quite different that I have almost completed. And this is actually a children's story. It follows the cycle of the year and goes through the main 8 celebrations of the seasons. It's a fantasy story for children, but it also incorporates the changing of the seasons, the celebration of the seasons, the natural world, how to observe the natural world around us. But it also throws up lots of opportunities for activities within either the family or children of a family, or perhaps the whole family or several generations. Because in this book, I have got the instructions on how to make a model of the cottage where all this action takes place. So basically, a doll's house, everything that goes in it, also easy recipes that you can make, children can make or make with their parents or grandparents, craft ideas. So it's a story, but it's got lots of activities to bring people together and to enhance, again, their appreciation of life. So that's what's in the pipeline next, and that's nearly finished.
Well, the best of luck with that. I've just put the your website up into the chat box so that people can explore your books for themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of your Druid activities, is this something which is ceremonial, or does it have a practical aspect to it?
Yes, it has a very practical aspect to it. It informs my daily life. It informs everything I do, my outlook, my actions, my reactions to people, my interactions with everything, the world around me. It is, and this is also something that I try to bring out in my books as well, is to how you can make the most basic life very authentic and very special and very individual to you to each to oneself, which is really important. As far as celebrations are concerned, we do celebrate the 8 main festivals of the Wheel of the Year. We also do the moon meditations and other things. If things occur, things come up, energies arise that need addressing or interacting with, and so sometimes individually, or we will come together as a little group in the valley, my friends and I and the family, and we will interact with whatever is going on. It might be the effects of a solar eclipse, or it might be something more local, actually within our own gardens or within the valley itself. It just depends what's happening and what people are sensing that is going on around them. So we are very fluid in how we live and how we celebrate, but it always comes basically down to reflecting everyday life.
Is it true to say that in some of these activities you're working with earth energies?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're working with lots of different energies, and I wouldn't like to put names on them. I mean, it sometimes is helpful to say, well, it's elemental energy, it's basic elemental earth energy, it's it's astral energy, it's solar energy that's coming in, and of course we've had a lot of that this year with all the solar flares and solar activity that's been going on. The sun's had a huge impact on the earth, and of course everything on the earth. So that's made a huge difference. But yes, there are lots. We are surrounded by energies. Everything in existence vibrates at certain different levels. Everything is vibrating energy. So to tap into any of this, and this is what I meant by sending people out into the garden to plant a seed, as a starting point, is really amazing. Does
And
that answer you?
yes, it does. Because I think, as we've been talking about over the last few minutes, I mean, there are so many barriers to getting people to connect with the earth and indeed with themselves, that there is so much against all this all the time. I mean, every time you walk down the street, every other person is either interacting with or speaking on or carrying a mobile phone. And I mean, I find this I have a mobile phone, but I don't use it that much. I don't have it like a millstone dragging around my neck. Do you think this technological stuff is becoming a big, but I mean, I do. I'll put my cards on the table and nail my colors to the mast, because as useful as this technology is, and the fact that it's enabling this conversation to take place at all, I don't deny that, and I don't deny a lot of the benefits. But I do think there is the dark monster of a technology which is there for nefarious purposes, to surveil, to control, to spy on us, to manipulate, to do all sorts of things which, to me, seem to border almost on black magic.
Yes, I think the key word here is imbalance. All these things, all the electronic technology that we have now in our lives have very good aspects. They are very useful. They can serve us very well, but it's got out of control. It's imbalanced. And with all the different problems that it's now beginning to raise, not just the cyberbullying, but all sorts of things, and the overlooking and overshadowing by companies and big business and God knows what, all the different things. And I keep saying to people, there's an off button. There's just turn your phone off, switch the thing off at your computer off at the plug, whatever. Walk away and leave it. If you're not carrying something, you're not connected to anything anymore. Just walk away. But people, of course, can't, because unfortunately, the use of especially mobile phones, which I also have a mobile phone, but I hardly use it. I use it more as a camera than actually a phone. Um, but I think because people are actually addicted to using these things. It is an addiction, and it's a very serious problem. So yes, it does worry me.
Yeah.
It's a good servant, but it's becoming it's leading our lives too much, and we are all suffering for it. We need to step away. It's dictating.
Yes, I always find it very ironic that what was meant to be a communications revolution has actually had, in many cases, the entirely opposite effect. It's alienated people, it's separated people, it's produced barriers and divisions and conflicts and all these other things. And I suppose that's how human beings are. That's the stage we're at, and it kind of leads me on to my next question. And I remain fairly optimistic about the human project and the grand plan and all that. But do you think that humanity, particularly spiritually, and I know we've done this intellectually, our intellects have improved massively over the last few centuries, but is humanity beginning, do you think, to turn some kind of corner and make some major breakthrough spiritually? Maybe not that, I'm not talking about the whole of humanity, but are there significant numbers of people now who are starting to reconnect with the spiritual side of themselves?
Quite definitely. I'm absolutely convinced that that is the case. And this provides a great deal of potential and hope for our future. It's what we need to do. And we also need to help the other people along who are lagging behind a bit, or perhaps not lagging behind is wrong, that aren't quite as advanced as some people are, that they need to be helped along and nurtured and looked after as well. And this is partly behind what we as a small group and I personally work with all the time. And we're coming back to this unconditional love. It's a way of generating higher energies to actually bring about a better and a new world, which is what we need. We cannot go on as we are. There's no way that we should go on as we are. And I think a lot of people are actually reaching the point where they're realizing this, and they're evincing this in different ways by their care about ecology and what's happening with the planet or with animals or humanity with mental health or lots of different things. But bring it all together. A lot of people are not satisfied, even all the political upheaval that's going on, especially at present. People aren't satisfied anymore. And we're back to the same with the religions. They're not going to be satisfied with being dished the same rubbish all over again. They need something new, something much better. And if other people can't provide it, then we need to help make that, create it for ourselves. But we need to do that by coming together and being a community, whether that's a local community or we need to be a world community, but lots of communities all connecting, large and small. And that's how we begin.
The turbulence that we witness in the world at the moment on so many different levels, to me, is a sign of the fact that we are in times of major transition, and whether that's from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, or whether it's part of the Kali Yuga or whatever cycle it is, it's quite clear that humanity is becoming something else. And you mentioned there this ingredient, chief ingredient of compassion, and people are becoming much more compassionate. I remember when I was young and a disabled person walked down the street, people would jeer and mock these people, which is completely unthinkable, certainly in the UK at the moment. I know that there still is bullying of disabled people. I'm not saying it's gone away, but attitudes can change very, very quickly. And it's also, it doesn't have to be the majority of people, does it, to effect change. Relatively small numbers of people in concentrated groups with a common aim and a common focus and a common interest can achieve great things, I believe. Yeah.
You can. You can just simply by sitting alone at home in your best armchair and actually, again, sending out positive energy, positive love, and also going through your ordinary life. One of the most amazing things I have found is actually the power of a hug and how different people, or just a kind word, and how people actually react. And situations can become totally different, and people's responses become totally different when you actually give a kind word, or even just take somebody's hand or give them a hug. And I know this is awfully difficult now since the pandemic, because everybody sort of steps back and says, don't want to come too close. But apart from that, it's a very basic action of bringing us together, and we can send out that lovely feeling of empathy, of compassion, of also joy and gratitude for our life. There's a lot that we need and can be so thankful for. We have a wonderful world. We have the potential to have an amazing life. And we need to focus on the positives of that and bring those fully into being. Not sit and moan and groan and cry and scream and throw things at the news on the television and think it's all hopeless and impossible. It's not. But it starts with us. It starts with each individual person.
Well, I think it also starts, and this is something I bang on about all the time. I think humanity is facing an identity crisis, and I think the chief reason for many of the problems that we are facing and have faced and probably will face is the fact we don't know who we are as human beings. We don't realize that principally we are spiritual entities who, fortunately or unfortunately, happen to be inhabiting physical bodies just at this moment. We're not bodies with souls kind of bolted on like an aftermarket accessory. This is our primary identity. And it strikes me that if people knew that they knew they had a soul which would reincarnate again and again and again, moderated by the unwavering law of karma, they would inevitably start to behave differently, because they would reap what they had previously sowed, personally and collectively, wouldn't they? I mean, this is the thing that I go on about all the time, but so many people, particularly influenced by scientific materialism, refuse to accept such things as spirit or soul, because you can't put them into an atom smasher and you can't test them in a test tube or anything. So they refuse to believe in these things. I just wish that, I could be more convincing with people that yes, you have a soul, and look after it.
Yes, but with quantum physics, they are coming up with lots of different ideas now as to different types of matter that they're even having difficulty identifying the purpose of. But there's lots of different levels. Just because we aren't scientifically evolved enough to be able to understand what's really going on doesn't mean to say it's not out there to be discovered. We just need to evolve a bit more to be able to understand it. And then they probably one day will be able to demonstrate some of these things. But we're just a bit still stuck in the Stone Age at present, as far as some of these very highly advanced states of being are. So just because we aren't clever enough to be able to demonstrate these things doesn't mean to say that they don't exist. It's rather like some very native person, say in New Guinea, when they first discovered the people in New Guinea, no doubt thought that things like radios and light bulbs were absolute complete magic.
The predominant religion in the world today, certainly in the West, is science, isn't it? Scientism, scientific materialism, this idea that only physical stuff exists. And yet science admits that it can't see more than 90% of the universe. The rest of it, stuff that should be there, apparently, they can't see. So they call it dark matter, dark energy, and ascribe these other forms to it. I mean, one day they might be able to photograph the ethereal part of the light spectrum, which they may be able to do already. They might even be able to start photographing the astral world. Who knows? But what would your chief message be to people who, are at a point in their lives, and this can happen, often doesn't happen till people get a bit older, but they start to ask those questions, why am I here? Is the purpose of life just to get a better car, get a better job, have a bit more power and prestige, etc., etc.? At what point do you think that happens to people? With me, you mentioned earlier on, for example, that you started your books just before your 60th birthday. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I know a few people who are at that age at the moment, and without exception, these people are all going through major changes in their life, major changes of direction. I didn't start to write my best books until I reached the age of about 57 or 58. And this is, well, the astrologers will say this is because it's your second Saturn return. Saturn has an orbit of 29 years approximately. So by the time you get onto your second one, it often means a big change in people's lives. And I wonder whether, when they reach that point in their life, perhaps at the 2/3 point or a bit later, they do start to ask those questions and start to question the prevalent things which have driven them throughout their lives, which have been, money and jobs and, just keeping a roof over their heads, basically.
Yes, I think that um, speaking personally, I would say that I only write when I have something to say. And when I have nothing to say, I don't write. So I think a lot of my younger life, I was too busy doing all the recognized things of work and family and what have you. And it was only when I had the time and the space and actually had something to say that I sat down and wrote it and said it. But I do think that people, as far as them having a spiritual life in a physical existence, it's very important for people, one, to understand that they are spiritual beings, and two, that they have chosen to be here at this time in the situations that they are in. And that, yes, they are also responsible for their karma, but that everyone who is here now, and even the poor people who are suffering so terribly, we have all chosen to be here at this precise time. And it is really important for us all to be here. We've come here for a purpose. And one of the things that I think can easily help to people to understand that there is more going on in their life is something I do when I do my soul healing, is just simply by taking people back into themselves, into their subconscious, and seeing what comes up and how it affects them. And when they remember it, how that affects them, and they go out into their life, and suddenly life looks a bit different for them. And I think this also helps them to realize that, one, they have their own deep memories, but two, that there is more to life than meets the eye that they've been missing, and that this is one of the ways that they can actually, another way that they can find their way into other levels of their own life.
Well, I think on that note, on that very wise note, we'll leave the conversation there. Gillian, thank you so much. It's been a great privilege and a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. So thank you for your attendance and participation, and may I wish you a very pleasant week ahead, and we'll see you again very shortly. So from Leeds, goodbye, everybody.